This is Join Us in France, episode 462. 462. Bonjour, I'm Annie Sargent, and Join Us in France is the podcast where we talk about France. Everyday life in France, great places to visit in France, French culture, history, gastronomy, and news related to travel to France. Today, I bring you a trip report with Matthew Gamache about visiting medieval sites in France with teenagers. When Matthew first came on the podcast, his daughters were quite young, and they are now, almost grown. How time flies. Well, this podcast is going to turn 10 next February, and I've been very lucky to have fans on the podcast for that many years. This podcast is supported by donors and listeners who buy my tours and services, including my itinerary consult service, my GPS self-guided tours of Paris on the Voice Map app, or take a day trip with me around the southwest of France in my electric car. You can browse all of that at my boutique, joinusinfrance.com/boutique. And for the magazine part of the podcast, after the interview with Matthew today, I'll discuss pickpocketing at the Gare du Nord in Paris. The Gare du Nord is a hot mess, but you can do fine there if you are warned and prepared. Bonjour, Matthew Gamache, and welcome back to Join Us in France. It's lovely to have you again. You've been on the podcast 4 times already. It's unbelievable. You have been one of the longest fans of the podcast and people who've given the most to the podcast. So thank you very much, and it's lovely to have you again.
Thanks, Danny. I'm happy to be back. I really enjoy the podcast, and I've gotten a lot out of it over the years as I've helped to plan these trips. And yeah, I really appreciate all the work that you do.
Wonderful. Okay, today we are going to talk about, the theme we're going to talk about is medieval touring with kids, with teens, because your kids were kids when we first talked about your visits, but now they're teens. Time flies.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, because the first time you were on the podcast was in 2015. That was episode 83. And then you came on episode 166 in 2017 and 174 in 2017. And this one is likely to be released in October 2023. So we go back a long time. It's wonderful.
Right.
Okay, so tell me when your trip was and who was traveling with you.
Yeah, so it's me, my wife, Erica, and my 2 kids, Alice and Nora, and they are 17 and 13 years old. And we traveled in the last week of June, first 2 weeks of July, 2022. And for a little bit of background, kind of developed a little formula here where in 2015 and 2017 and now 2022, we've been able to take the last week of June and the first 2 weeks of July to travel around France and really focusing on spending around a week in a region and getting a feel for what that region is all about and seeing all the sites in that region and enjoying what the regions have to offer.
And this time you were mostly in Brittany and northern France, right?
That's right. Yeah. So the previous trips, we kind of dipped into southwestern France, the Alps, those areas. And for this trip, we were looking at where haven't we gone yet and a combination of what regions haven't we seen yet and what region do we want to go back and spend more time in. And, we wanted to go back to Brittany because we had spent a few days there in 2017 and we really liked it and we wanted to explore that more. But in addition to that, we really wanted to see Alsace, which is on the complete opposite side of the country.
Yeah.
So those were our 2 top priorities. And we said, okay, well, if we start in one and end in the other, can we piece a trip together? That will be fun and engaging and make sense. So that's what we did.
Right. So you went all the way across France, west to east, but mostly hugging the northern half of France this time.
Yeah. I could give you a little bit more detailed itinerary. So,
please.
The way it came together is this. We flew Air Portugal, which meant we could fly into Orly Airport. And from there, we could get right into a rental car and we drove to Chartres for our first night there because it was less than an hour drive. And that's pretty much my threshold for driving after landing from an overnight flight.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So a quick stop there and then on to the Dinan area of Brittany for 6 nights. And during that time, we took a 1-night diversion over to Normandy to see some Normandy sites. So that kind of wraps up. That's week 1. And then for week 2, we drove all the way across to Burgundy and spent 7 nights there. And then for week 3, we spent 5 nights in Alsace. And then the final 2 nights after training back from Alsace to Paris, we spent the final 2 nights in Paris. So that's kind of how we worked it, kind of get all the way out to the west and then work our way back east.
Wow. Yeah, that's a wonderful. And it's great that you spend 3 weeks. Like you really get a feel for the country when you do it that way. And it seems to me that you always do that, right?
Yeah, we've kind of fallen into this formula. It really works for us. 3 weeks is really good. I feel like by the time you get like midway through the vacation, feeling like he's kind of forgotten about home a little bit. It gives you a lot of time to bond with the family. And you can have different paces. I feel like in the first week, we kind of tend to go, get a lot done because we have a lot of energy. And maybe in the second week, we slow down a little bit and then build up some speed as we get to the end. We've gotten used to it. It's our travel style. And we've been very lucky to have the opportunity to do this as much as we have.
And you usually you rent apartments, right?
Yeah, for the most part. In Paris, we stay in hotels, but in the smaller regions, we've been able to find some pretty nice houses to stay in. And I think that's part of what makes these trips work for us is that number one, we have a nice base to stay in so we can cook and make our own food because going out to eat every night for 3 weeks would be relentless.
Yeah.
And secondly, the costs are much more affordable when you're outside of Paris.
Right.
So.
And one of your daughters has food allergies, right? If I remember correctly.
Yes. Good point. So that's Nora, who's 13. So she has actually grown out of her egg allergy, which has made traveling much easier.
Yes.
So in the previous trips, we had to avoid egg and nut. This trip, we only had to avoid nuts, which is pretty easy to do in northern France. I think, there's walnuts in the south, but there's not really much to worry about where we went. So that getting rid of eggs is huge because it opens up all kinds of desserts and dinner options.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I bet she enjoyed that better.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, she could have lots of crepes. The crepes is the number one addition to it. So.
Yes. And how do you book your apartments? Do you do it through booking.com or Airbnb?
So I start with Vrbo, VRBO, and then see where that takes me.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. For the 3 places that we booked, one of them, the one in Dinan, we got through Vrbo, and it was a place that we stayed in 2017. That was easy. We knew all about it. The house that we stayed in Burgundy was also through Vrbo, but that house is part of a bed and breakfast. So we could book directly with them through their bed and breakfast site. And then again, Vrbo for the place in Alsace.
Yeah. And usually most of these apartment rentals will list their apartment in several places. So you'll find the same apartments on VRBO and on Airbnb and on sometimes Gîtes de France. Sometimes they have their own websites. You just need to look around a little bit. But yes, that's a good way to do it. And you haven't had any nasty surprises or anything like that, have you?
No, it's been very good. And I think, we've done this enough now that we have a feel for what we're looking for and what kind of reviews we're looking for and amenities. And I feel like because we start early, I usually start planning these trips about a year before. That's really the first thing I look at. Like, okay, if we want to go to Alsace, let's take a look at what the house options are, and that will help us guide kind of where we want to stay. Mm-hmm. If you're early than everyone else, you get kind of your pick of house. And
yes.
That's been a successful approach for us, and we've never stayed in a place that has been inconsistent with what was written on the site.
Yes, and honestly, I have the same attitude towards this. This year, our family vacation included a week in Provence, and I booked that. Mm-hmm. So we went in July, and I booked it in January. And in January, I had so many choices that I could just say, I want air conditioning, I want this town, I could have my selection. And as you get closer, the good ones are gone. So it's best if you can look early, a year perhaps, if you are that planner, but at least 8 months. It's a good amount of time. So, okay, wonderful. And let's briefly mention driving in France. You've done it lots. I assume there were no surprises there either.
No surprises, no tickets.
Aha, bravo.
This was yeah. I am very proud that after 10 weeks in France, I have received no ticket. I live in Greater Boston, and it's like night and day. Anywhere I've driven in France has been a joy.
Really? It's harder to drive in Boston?
Yeah, much more challenging. And in France, I feel like it's just a lot more orderly. And I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And this was the only time that we've really drove anywhere near Metro Paris. But the ride out of Orly was fine. I had no issues. Yeah. And, generally we had zero issues the whole trip driving. But I will say that going all the way across from Brittany to Burgundy is a long day.
Yes.
I'm not sure I would do that again.
Yes, that's a long drive. Yes, I wouldn't do that. I would break it up in that, at least one night. And did you go through Paris and down towards the Rhone Valley, or how did you do it?
For that drive, it wasn't. So we were going to Guédelon, which we can get into in a moment. So we cut across and we didn't go, up through Paris because we said the fastest way to kind of go a little bit south of there.
Uh-huh.
It was very long. The highway, there was a lot of highway. And then you got off the highway for like 2 hours. So it's a bit of a commitment, not only to get across the country, but also to get to Guédelon.
Yeah. Okay, so many people have reported that picking up a rental car in Orly and returning a rental car in Orly is much easier than at CDG. So I just wanted to put that out there. If you have a choice, now the thing is, Orly is usually mostly European flights or within France flights. There's not that many international flights that land in Orly, but it is a much smaller airport. And it's easier to get around. Like, it's not as overwhelming.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've never picked up a car in CDG, but the process in Orly was fine.
Good. All right. So now let's talk about your favorite things that you did on this trip. And you list some that I have not done myself. So I'm really interested to hear your thoughts about those.
Yeah, no problem. But before we get into that, I just wanted to note that, one of the kind of the real nice things about this trip, kind of unintended nice thing about this trip, is that when you go along northern France, as we did, you hit all of these medieval sites. And I would say our family's somewhat enthusiastic about medieval Europe. It was a nice way to kind of string the trip together and kind of tie some continuity across all of the sites. So, we could touch on some of these in more detail, but, across the whole trip, we were able to see cathedrals and Sargent and Dole and Bayeux. We saw the Cluny Museum, the Unterlinden Museum, Guédelon Castle, the Hospice de Beaune, Bayeux Tapestry, a lot of just really unique, specifically medieval sites, which I think, is good for conversation. We talk about it. We watched some shows and read some of the things before we got there. So that was kind of a nice treat.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you have some of the early medieval, like Hospice de Beaune was set up early in the medieval period. And then you have the Bayeux Tapestry that's late in the medieval period. And thankfully, medieval is 1,000 years. So, there's a lot of medieval in France. And the more recent medieval, we know quite a lot about. Obviously, the earlier medieval, it gets to be a little bit, we're making guesses here, but it's always fun. It feels like, and I think we've discussed this on a previous episode, it really feels like stepping into a time machine when you get immersed in these sites. And have you noticed that the sites do a better job with the way they present themselves? I find that everywhere I go now, they have better technical ways to present the site, the iPads where you can just point the iPad somewhere and it's going to show you what it used to look like, all decked out with the tapestries and the colors and the furniture and all that. And lots of places have stuff like that and makes it so much nicer.
I agree. And this is a big difference. The last time we were in France was 2017. And this time around, everywhere we went, there was some sort of iPad we could use to help explain things. Of course, the Tapestry Museum is crazy. That's really an amazing way to display it. But that's a whole different thing. But yes, I agree. A lot more guided tour, hand-guided tours with iPads.
Yes. And I really think that museums in France are getting with it. I mean, we still have the dusty old museum that doesn't want to change anything, but we don't have very many of those anymore. It's mostly, younger people who get hired to, these are people who have doctoral degrees in museology, I guess. And they really know all the technical stuff you can do, and they do a fantastic job at this. And most French museums have plenty of budget too. So, they can do fun things. And so that makes it much easier to visit with kids or teens. And even for me, I mean, honestly, I love it when I point the iPad and it shows me what it used to look like. Like, oh, cool. I mean, it used to be you had to get the book with, where you had the little plastic thing that you would put over it. You remember those?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. That was a good start, but we've gotten better. We've done better. Right. So let's talk about your favorite things and tell us about them and tell us why other people should go there.
Right. So as I noted, back in 2017, we spent 4 nights around Dinan in Brittany and 2 nights on the southern coast of Brittany, and we wanted to go back. So this time we went back, stayed in the same house in Dinan for 6 nights and really enjoyed it. I think of all the regions that we've been to in France, Brittany has been our family's favorite. And I think it's a lot to do with you have access to this beautiful medieval towns, great food. I really love creperies. I like cider. You're near the coast. You get oysters and mussels to eat at the coast. You can go, there's great walks and hikes along the coast. I really like kind of just the general vibe. So when we were in Brittany, we did a lot of walks along the river. We rode bikes along the river. We went to the northern coast and we found a oyster and mussel farm producer right there, kind of situated between Mount Saint Michel and Cancale. And they have a little shop where they sell a very limited menu of mussels, oysters, some pate and cider and fish soup. And we went there twice and just really enjoyed it. It's really casual. The food's great. Prices are great. And then when you're done, you just go on a nice walk as far as you want to go. And it's very beautiful and really kind of enjoyed that.
Right. And so that was called La Dégustation Tonneau. And it's in Viviers-sur-Mer. So I'll put the link in the show notes for that because, that's a great recommendation.
Yeah, and it's just a charming town and had a few shops right along the coast and including this place where you can get lunch at and lunch or dinner, I guess, during the season. It was fantastic. I just really liked it and just a nice, very casual vibe. But I think that one thing that, if you go through our previous trips, it was almost exclusively we were eating and cooking our own food, largely because of food allergy restrictions. This time we did a lot more eating out, but we tended to go more casual. These places like this small place on the side of the road, food carts and things like that. And that's more our style.
And how did you find them?
Google.
Okay.
I think just doing some research before the trip, just looking at Google Maps and seeing what's around and scoping out that way, really.
Yeah, and if you want the more casual places, probably they don't even take reservations. So you just, when you're there, you just say near me and you look at what's highly rated near you. Google has gotten smarter. They used to just display stuff in your own language, but now they show you more what locals think and things like that. So you can see it, you can have a broader perspective because it seems to me like French people and visitors have a different idea of what's a good restaurant. Sometimes. So it's good to look at different reviews in different languages and things like that. And I should say also that coastal Brittany and Brittany in general is really, really popular with French people for vacations. And so do not leave booking your apartment till the last minute because you won't find any. Especially with climate change, many places in France are getting warmer. I mean, as we record this, it's like 40 degrees in Provence. And we're recording, middle of July. And the episode's not going to come out for several months. But, you have to understand that July and August, most French people would rather be in Brittany than in Provence because they don't want to burn. It makes for a much better vacation if the weather is in the 70s than in the hundreds.
Yep. That's true for us as well. Yeah. While we were there, we took a drive out to the Rose Granite Coast, which took us about an hour and a half to get there. It's much further west than where we were staying in Dinan. But to hike along the coast that has a lot of large pink rock, it's very similar to Acadia National Park in Maine. Very pretty. And we were hoping to do that in 2017, but we got rained out. So we did it on this trip and it was definitely worth it. It was an amazing hike and we had a picnic lunch. And as we were sitting there, maybe 8 or 9 dolphins were there in the ocean that we could see and observe. It was pretty nice.
Yeah. And how did you find the hike? Tell us how you found the hike.
Oh, it's just looking up Brittany hikes. I had a book on France hike. So I saw it in there and then followed up online and got some reviews. And it seems like the hike to do if you're interested in seeing these rocks.
Right. It's really not that difficult to find. I'm just asking you because people will ask, how'd you find it? It's really easy. You can Google it. coastal pass or voie verte or, terms like that will take you right there. Or you could just ask the local tourist office, what's a fun hike to do at this level of difficulty? And there's also apps that will tell you, will list all the hikes at different, Komoot is one of them. There's a bunch of them. And you can just say, this level of difficulty, this length, whatever, and it'll give you what you want. So just do a little bit of research and you'll be fine. You don't need to spend days on this. In 15 minutes, you'll find it.
Yeah. So that was great. And just the 5 full days that we spent in Brittany, which is really a lot of fun. But during that week, we took one day out of it and went to Normandy and stayed in Bayeux and saw the tapestry and the American Cemetery and the D-Day Museum. Obviously, those two are incredible sites that were really good. I felt like obviously the Omaha Beach and the D-Day Museum and those sites have been talked about a lot in the podcast, so I won't get into too much here. But the museum at the cemetery was extremely moving.
Yeah.
And what I really liked about it is it just brought kind of the individuality and personalities of the people who fought and died there to life in a really touching and moving way. All 4 of us really appreciated it. I'm glad that we went there now when the kids were older than in the previous trips, because I felt like it was really impactful.
Yeah, I think D-Day, much younger kids are not going to remember much of that, if any. So probably, yes, over 10 is probably a good choice for bringing your kids there. Yeah.
As we moved across the country from week 1 to week 2, we stopped in Guédelon at the Guédelon Castle. So for those of you who don't know, this is a site where the French government has kind of commissioned a group of people to build a castle as if it was the Middle Ages. So you have to source all of the materials, whether it's clay or wood or water or whatever, from the site. And you have to use all the techniques that were used at that time. So it's quite the project. It's something like a 25-year project.
Yeah, it's been going on for a long time.
Yeah. So the castle, it seems like it's about 80% built. And it was really interesting. And I felt like it was fun. But if I were to recommend it to others, I would say it really helps to learn more about it before you get there. So we watched a show on YouTube called Secrets of the Castle. I think it's like 4 episodes that really talks in detail about what they're doing and how that is from the period and all of that stuff. If we hadn't watched that, I would have looked at it and said, okay, this is fine. But all of it was in French. There really wasn't much English, which of course is fine. But I felt like we got a lot more out of it because we were prepared to understand what we were seeing. Because I think some of the amazing part of it goes into the details. Like to make a brick is a whole thing, right? You source the material, you need water, you need all these things. So when you look at the guy there who's making bricks, it's a lot more meaning if you kind of know all the detail and all the work that goes into that. It's just one example.
All the different levels and the different types of bricks. And they probably have different types of brick even there at Guédelon.
Yes, right.
So the Secrets of the Castle is about Guédelon, right? Or is it about castles in general?
No, it's about Guédelon.
Okay. Cool. I'm going to have to watch that. Because it's out of the way enough that even though I drive a fair bit around France, I've never made it there because it's just never convenient to go there. And I wonder if that's why they put it there, to attract more people to the area. But it's just not a place where you will just, there it is. Let's go. It happens with a lot of stuff in France. Sometimes you drive along and you go, I've heard of this. I want to see it. But Guédelon, it's not likely.
Nope, it's actually quite inconvenient to get to. Just imagine the drive from Dinan to Burgundy as long as it is. And I think just the diversion to get to Guédelon, which looks kind of on the way on the map, added like an hour and a half to the drive.
Yeah.
So it is a commitment to go there. So I highly recommend being prepared so that you get the most out of it when you're there.
Yeah, because you have to get off the freeway and drive quite a long way. I mean, it looks like it's between Orléans and Dijon, right? You think,
yes.
Yeah, between Orléans and Dijon, it'll be easy. Yeah, but those roads are teeny tiny. You're not going to go fast.
Yeah, and you know me, I like the country roads, but after an hour and a half of them, it's like enough. Where is the place?
I hear you. All right, wonderful.
So from there in Burgundy, ironically, I think the thing that we enjoyed the most was our day trip to the Jura region. So we really enjoyed Burgundy. It was a very relaxing week. And because we stayed in a cottage that was associated with a bed and breakfast in this small town called Nanteau, they had a pool and they had a boule court. And we spent a lot of time doing pool and boule just to relax and wind down from a very busy first week, which was great. And, we did bike riding in the vineyards. We toured Beaune quite a bit, which was only 10 minutes away. Mm-hmm. But the most engaging day, as I said, is we went out to the Jura region and went to Arbois, which is a town in the Jura. It took us about an hour to get there. And this is, among other things, this is the home of Louis Pasteur. And they had just a really engaging museum there about his life and, what went on in the home with respect to his science and all of that. And just a really nice, small museum that's kind of off the beaten path. We went for a really nice hike that probably 2.5 hours or so up into this area where there's some waterfalls and some interesting geology in the forest. And that was really fun. We got to go to buy some food at a Jura meat and cheese shop, which is pretty unique in that this is where Comté cheese comes from. And they have this massive turntable full of Comté, and you point it to the one you want and they spin the wheel, and they're hard to explain, but they have like a laser on it and they cut based on where the laser is. It's really unique.
Wow.
So we cut a bunch of cheese from there, and we bought some Jura wine, which is something that we knew about going in. It's got a little different taste to it than other wines, I think, other white wines. So that was fun. So that was just kind of an engaging one day in the Jura, which we didn't really know much about. And I would recommend the town of Arbois for folks who want to check out something a little bit different.
Yeah, we have. I mean, we've mentioned it a little bit on the podcast, but not very much. So really, that's a part of France. I know Elise lived there shortly, and it's kind of a wet part of France. But if you go in July, the weather is probably going to be nice. And it sounds like a part of France I should go explore because I don't know it very well. And I'm totally enamored with Louis Pasteur, everything having to do with Louis Pasteur.
Oh, really?
I would love it. Yeah. I've read several biographies about him and stuff. So I really, and his wife was quite spectacular. She was amazing. She did such amazing second fiddle, but without second fiddle, there wouldn't have been any Louis Pasteur. So
exactly. And that really comes out in the tour as well. This is another, like we said, they give you an iPad and you go through the rooms and there's an audio tour that goes with it. And it was really well done. Probably the best of that type of thing that we saw on our trip.
Oh, that's really good to know.
Meaning like the best kind of audio-visual tour that we saw.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's really good to know. I don't think anybody had mentioned that before on the podcast. So thank you. That's great.
No problem. So then getting back to Burgundy. Burgundy is great. Cheese is great. The food is great. We got to, I guess, explore a little bit more wine than we have in the past. And we were staying in this town called Nanteau, which, as I noted, is about a 10-minute drive from Beaune. Very small town. We got to have kind of that small wine town feel. And it was fun. You can't beat the cheese there. It's just so good. The Délice de Pommade with the mustard cheese on the outside. We had that but every day.
Délice de Pommade is what it's called?
Yeah.
I'm going to have to Google it right now because I have not had this cheese. That's a really interesting...
Yeah, it's very good.
Huh. And what is on the outside? Is it like a... it's a mustard.
It's mustard seed. Yeah.
Oh.
Yep. It's a soft cow cheese that's kind of formed into a ball and covered with mustard seed. It's very good. We also like Epoisse, but it's not nearly as strong as Epoisse.
Okay. Yeah, Epoisse is like a bit much.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, excellent. I will have to be on the lookout for this. Now that I've seen it, perhaps I'll see it at the fromagerie somewhere. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. So, excellent. So, good week there. And then as we moved on to Alsace. We've gone all around the country in these 3 trips. And I keep, one of my themes is like, you can see kind of a lot of Western Europe within France's boundaries itself. So here we're now at the kind of the German-French boundary, a lot more Germanic thing. We went into Staufen, Germany on our ride over there for lunch, which is fun. So yeah, that's kind of just a really unique feel out there.
Yeah.
And I know it's pretty popular with the Giants in France community as well. So We stayed in, I believe it's pronounced Iguisheim, which is a small town just south of Colmar. We were choosing between Colmar and Iguisheim. We chose Iguisheim. It was really nice. It was fine. I think if we were to do it again, we would have stayed in Colmar just because I was concerned about parking and logistics in Colmar, but it really was a fairly easy city to manage.
Yeah, in July it's easy.
Probably,
in December it's a nightmare, but in July it's easy.
You mean because of the Christmas market?
Yes. Colmar just quintuples in size in December. And so everything is just totally like booked up and you can't park, you can't move. It's, but the rest of the year it's much quieter. And in January, they shut down. Like, it's really funny. All the stores, they just on vacation all of January. Don't even try to buy anything in Colmar in January. It's closed. The whole town goes away. But you went to the Unterlinden Museum, which is really interesting. I enjoyed that as well.
Yeah, that's what I was just about to talk about. That's a real famous museum in Colmar that's famous because it has the Eisenheim altarpiece, which I'm probably mispronouncing, but which is one of the more incredible pieces of art I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Colmar is a beautiful place worth going to on its own right. But even if it just had this museum, it would still be worth going to because this work of art is incredible. It's an altarpiece that's kind of broken down for you. So you can see kind of each panel separately with a nice audio guide that goes with it. Let's see, I'm probably going to get the history wrong, but it was originally commissioned for a hospital that focuses on a specific skin disease. And the paintings are kind of, the stories are told kind of in that theme, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah. It's very vivid. The colors are so vivid. And an altarpiece was used to tell different stories. It's like a storybook, a cartoon, if you wish, but it's much more sophisticated than a cartoon. But they would just open and close panels depending on what month it was and the time of the year and the liturgy that was associated with that time of the year. And it is just like vivid. The monsters really look monstrous and the happy bits are very happy. I mean, it's just really interesting to see. And they break it down for you. You see the actual piece, the whole altarpiece, but then they have stuff on the side where you can see the different bits and what they represent and why they are important and when they were displayed. And so if you went to church, you wouldn't see it fully all at once. You'd have to go back and back and back and back to see it all.
Yes, thank you. That's a much better description than what I gave for sure. I thought it was pretty amazing.
Yeah. And, since the theme of your visit, you wanted to look at a lot of medieval stuff. Well, that's like one of the biggest treasures, between the Bayeux tapestry that you saw that we're probably going to talk about in a minute and this museum. You saw some of the jewels of the Middle Ages right there.
Yeah, and if you want to go back to the Bayeux tapestry, that was during our day in Normandy. And just amazing for those of you who are familiar with it. You step in on a conveyor belt and you have an audio guide in your ear and the conveyor belt moves you along the tapestry, which tells the story of
William the
Battle
Conqueror.
of Hastings.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just really interesting and really unique and found that to be really, really fun.
Yeah. And it's unbelievable that somebody would that a group of women probably took the time to tell this story. And again, it's like really vivid storytelling, but in a tapestry form. And nowadays, nobody does tapestries. I'm not aware of any major artist that produces tapestries to tell stories today, but it was huge back then.
That's right. One of a kind. While we were in Colmar, we also went to the Bartholdi Museum, who is the man who designed the Statue of Liberty. That was a really good museum too. Not as good as some of the other things we've talked about, but I found the story of his life to be pretty engaging. So I'd recommend that as well.
Very cool.
And one of the days we were in Alsace, we went to Europa Park, which is a big theme and amusement park right across the border in Germany.
Oh.
And that was great. And to the Americans listening, it's like if you combine Epcot Center with Six Flags. So really great roller coasters and it was thematically laid out, kind of like Epcot. You have like a Germany town and a Ireland town and all of that. It was really fun. It was the middle of summer, so the lines are pretty long. But wasn't that bad in terms of the wait. We got to do all of the best rides several times. and the kids loved it. I loved it. I thought it was really good.
It's not too far into Germany?
So we were staying, as I said, in Igelsheim. It took us an hour to get to Rust, Germany, which is where it's located.
Okay.
Easy drive. So we were able to get there right when the park opened, left when the park closed. Relatively speaking, it was pretty affordable relative to what I'm used to in the States, including the admission and the food near there. Overall, just an enjoyable, fun day. And I said, and there are people from all countries there, that's for sure.
That's good. So is it more geared toward teenagers, or do they also have stuff for kids, for younger kids?
It's got everything. So it's got like your toddler section, and then it's got the super roller coasters that go upside down and all that. So the full spectrum.
So it's the size of a Six Flags kind of place?
Yeah. Yep.
Wow. Yeah, this is not one I've been to. I like amusement parks like this usually. I just haven't gotten to that one.
On our trips, we like to do something like that to keep the kids engaged. And it's different. You know, we're with the locals, doing the local thing, and it's nice.
And then you rented bikes to ride through Burgundy and Brittany? Was that fairly easy to do and arrange?
Yes, it was. Brittany, extremely easy. Actually, both places extremely easy. Brittany was particularly easy because the bike rental place was a 1-minute walk from where we were staying. And the ride along the Rance River was extremely flat and beautiful and very easy. In Burgundy, it's a little bit more involved. You know, we weren't staying in Beaune, so we drove to Beaune, rented the bikes there, got to the bike path, and then got up into the vineyard, which is a little bit more hilly. It's not, I wouldn't say it's real hilly, it's just a little bit more hilly.
Yeah.
It's a little bit more challenging for those of us who don't ride bikes all that often, but rewarding and fun. Beautiful.
Wonderful. Okay, and we're going to end on walking through Paris on the evening of July 14th. I want to hear what it's like to spend July 14th, Bastille Day, in Paris.
Yeah, so we dropped off the car in Strasbourg and then took the train into Paris. And we arrived on July 14th and got in a taxi from the train station to our place that we were staying in, Montparnasse. And just that taxi ride in itself was hilarious because there was a lot going on in Paris, and it's difficult to get through it. So that was an experience.
A lot of road closures, I bet.
Yes, yeah. And taxi drivers in Paris are great. They know how to handle all this stuff. And I just sit back and watch, and actually quite a fun ride. So then on that day, we went to some neighborhoods. We went up to see where Amelie, the movie, was set or filmed. So that was neat. And then we went out to eat in the Marais. And then we kind of meandered our way down from, that northern spot down to central Paris by foot. And as we walked through, it's like, 8 o'clock at night or 9 o'clock at night. And it was just really nice to see everybody out. It was just a really energetic vibe. Obviously, it's a holiday, so people are out hanging out. And sometimes you catch a city in that kind of magical moment where you're just walking through and it seems like everybody's out having a good time. And it's really fun.
That's cool. Yeah. So obviously you missed the fireworks, which are usually on the 13th in the evening. I'm not sure if that's what they did this year, but typically it's on the 13th. And then the big parade and stuff is on the morning of the 14th.
Yeah, we missed all that, and that's fine. Not really our thing anyway. But like I said, it was really what we enjoyed, was just kind of the vibrancy of seeing Paris in full swing there.
Yeah. And you could have gone to the firemen's balls, which are a big thing on July 14th that evening. They put on dances, I guess, and people, participate, pay a little bit of money to get into the firemen's balls. And they're really fun and very traditional. So that's another thing you can do. But like you said, just being in Paris on July 14th is typically very fun. I know this year they had a massive amount of security. But that's just, it's a big city. They need to have security. There's not much we can do about that, I guess. All right. Anything else you want to? And so I want to mention that you listed all of your accommodations and all of that. And I'll put all of that in the show notes for people who want to look for your recommendations. And you also list some restaurants and the foods you liked. All of this will be in your guest notes. It sounds like you had a wonderful time and that possibly you'll come back to France. Who knows?
Yeah, I think so. If I could just talk about a couple more things from we specifically did because of Joyous in France podcast episode. So when we were in Paris, we went to the Marie Curie Museum, which I would not have known about if it wasn't for your episode on the museum.
Yeah.
And thought it was great. It was a good time. It was a nice museum to pair with the Louis Pasteur Museum.
Very true, yeah.
I get the theme of scientists.
Oh, and I bet the
so
Marie Curie Museum is much, much smaller than the Pasteur Museum in size, right?
Yes, it was small. Yeah. This whole trip was amazing weather. I can't believe how lucky we were with weather. It was perfect weather every day. No rain, no extreme heat. It was amazing. And when we were in Alsace, we had one day, it was going to be in the 90s or Fahrenheit. And that was really the first time all trip that was going to happen. And we had some plans, but we got to scrap them and decided to go up into the Vosges Mountains based on, the podcast that you and Elise did on that region. It sounded like we'd had some things to do up there and it would be cooler because it's elevated. And we had a great day. We drove up there. We did some alpine luge activities. We went to a lake and hung out and had blueberry pie, which you recommended on your podcast. And it was super. And I love your podcasts that kind of go places like that and explain kind of what people do there and what the feel is. It really helps with having kind of a flexible trip plan when we're in the middle of these trips. So I appreciate it.
Oh, that's wonderful. And indeed, there is something to do in every part of France. And even if you don't know anything about it, just when you're there, Google, what can I do around here? Or some query like that. And you will find dozens of things. Or go to the tourist office. Honestly, there are very few places in France where I would say, well, this holds no interest. Anywhere is something. But some places have some really, really fun things that are very different from what you can do in the US, which is why people like it, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, Matt, thank you so much for coming back on the podcast, for telling us about this trip, sharing some great ideas and inspiration for other people to go off the beaten track a little bit in France, which is something first-time visitors typically don't do. But there is so much to explore and so much to do all over that it's fantastic to have you tell us about some of your favorites. Merci beaucoup, Matt.
Thank you.
Au revoir. Again, I want to thank my patrons for giving back and supporting the show. Patrons get several exclusive rewards for becoming members. You can see them at patreon.com/join us. That's Patreon. Join us, no spaces or dashes. Thank you all for your support of this podcast. It's 10 years old almost, and some of you have been supporting the show for almost that many years. Thank you so much. You are fantastic. And a shout out this week to new patrons, Susan C. and Lloyd Dauber. To join this wonderful community of Francophiles, go to patreon.com/join us. And to support Elise, go to patreon.com/Elise Art. So that's ELYSART. This week, I published a Patreon reward exploring the reasons why Napoleon sold Louisiana to the United States and what might have happened if he hadn't. This is part of a French history series. Call it the French History Brief. This series is a mini episode, much like the podcast, but shorter, and it's about a specific event in French history, like the history of the burghers of Calais, the amazing statue by Auguste Rodin, the Black Death, how Louis XVI couldn't catch a break, and many others. And now on Patreon, you have a collection tab where you can see all of the French history briefs. It's very easy to find them. You can, of course, also take advantage of my expertise as your personal itinerary consultant. I offer 2 levels of service. The Bonjour service, where we talk, you ask me all your questions, I give you suggestions, and you're ready to decide and go ahead with whatever you are struggling with. You can also go with the VIP service, where we talk also for an hour on Zoom, but then I send you a detailed document that outlines everything we discussed, as well as a summary of the best advice shared on this podcast for many years. To get started, purchase the service at joinusinfrance.com/boutique, and you'll get emails guiding you through the process. And if you don't need a consult, you just like a little bit of help structuring your days in Paris, look at my GPS self-guided tours available on the Voice Map app. Choose from the Eiffel Tower, the Ile de la Cité, Le Marais, Montmartre, Saint-Germain-des-Prés, or the Latin Quarter. I show you the best of each neighborhood, recommend museums, restaurants, and it's everything you need to know to have a grand time for a few dollars. It's very inexpensive. You should download the tours as soon as you buy them on your house Wi-Fi. You can explore the tour at home if you wish. Then when you get to Paris, open Voice Map, go to the appointed start of the tour, and I'll start talking. It's magic. It works great. And I guarantee you'll have a great time. And I'm not the only one to say so. To read reviews, hundreds of reviews on those tours, go to joinusinfrance.com/Annie Tours. Okay, let's talk about the Gare du Nord because, like I said in the intro, it's a hot mess and there are some things you need to know. I believe that being warned against these scams that are prevalent there is going to make you be able to just see them coming and not fall for it. I'm going to read you a post from Reddit from an anonymous poster who said this, but this is last week, October 2023, okay? I know that pickpocketing in Paris is a common topic and also overhyped, but we just had a rough experience and wanted to help others avoid similar. We took the RER from CDG, that's the airport in Paris, Charles de Gaulle, to Gare du Nord and transferred on Metro Line 5 there. Unfortunately, the metro was unexpectedly packed, and then in parentheses he says, we were not prepared for this, and we were suddenly surrounded. Both my companion and I could immediately feel people putting their hands in our pockets, but we could do almost nothing. We were so hemmed in. My companion grabbed one guy's hand that was in his pocket and started squeezing. The guy started yelling as if we were the ones trying to assault him. There was enough of a commotion and we had reached the next stop, so the guys all got off, still acting as if we were the aggressors. In the end, they got nothing. Luckily, because our pockets were sufficiently deep and tight. Here's my suggestion for others visiting to prevent this. Put everything except your metro ticket in your roller bag, not the outside pockets, obviously. Nobody is trying to run off with your roller bag. Not true, but I'll get back to that as well. So long as you don't leave it unwatched, of course. By the way, here was the thief's method. He had his hand in a black plastic bag and stuck his bag-covered hand in my friend's pocket. Had he been successful, the wallet would be inside the plastic bag when he pulled it out, thus appearing as if it was just his belongings. I hope this is helpful. Okay, all right. The first thing you need to know is that there has been a problem with this for a long time. The RER between the airport and the city of Paris is a problem because that goes across the poorest part of France. You cannot find places with lower income anywhere in France. So, obviously, this is an area where people who live there may not have the means to make a good living. Okay, let's just put it that way. This RER, there's two of them. There's one that's direct, which is the least bad, and there's one that actually stops at lots of different stations. What happens when the RER stops at the stations is that there are people on the platform who just get in, grab whatever they can, and exit the train, and the doors close, and there's nothing you can do. And they will grab your roller bag, they will grab your purse, your suitcase, they will grab whatever they can, okay? So, the RER that stops at all the stations avoid at all costs because they do this constantly. Now, because they do this constantly, the security is trying to do something about this, but there's so many, it's hard to manage it. So, because they're trying to do something about this, it just pushed the problem a little further. So now they got on the metro on line 5, which they were surprised was packed. I'm sorry. This is Paris, okay? Maybe you haven't been to Paris. Okay, that's fair. Paris, just like all the other big cities, has a very busy metro system. And depending on the time of day, it's worse than others, but it's often packed. And people just crowding around you. They do this in groups, okay? It's usually, anymore, it's not just, you think it's the gentleman pickpocket that's going to come and be very smooth. No. This is not it. This is like 3 or 4 people, sometimes female, sometimes male, sometimes white, sometimes black. It doesn't matter. You don't know who these people are. There's a bunch of them. And they will just cram you and they will grab your stuff. And this bag thing where they just put a bag in your stuff and then they look like, this is pretty clever. I hadn't heard of this one already. So what's the solution to this? When you are arriving in Paris, okay, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I have to tell you this again and again and again, especially if you're not city savvy, and especially if you don't think you could recover from a thing like this, because there are people who experience robbery when they arrive, and then it spoils the rest of their vacation. Okay, the solution to this is do not take the RER when you arrive in Paris. It's very simple. There are taxis. It's a set price. You can look it up. I'm not going to tell you the prices right now because they change a little bit all the time, but it's around 65 euros. So what you do is when you exit the airport, you just go, you follow the signs for the taxi, you go to the official taxi line because there are scammers in the airport as well, and you just wait for the next taxi. It'll cost you 65 euros. Right now it's 65 or less, depending on exactly where you're going in Paris. And there will be no thieves, okay? And you won't have to handle suitcases up and down stairs and with closing doors and things like that. Now, I'm perfectly aware that there are city-savvy people who can do this, okay? I can do this. I don't like to do it and I avoid it, but I can. There are most of us, especially people who come to a big city for the first time, are not going to be able to handle this sort of pressure. Okay, so save yourself trouble. It's 65 bucks for heaven's sakes, okay? Just get on a taxi and there won't be any trouble. Now, because this is Reddit, there are comments, and I'm going to read a few. Some guy says, good reaction and great that you didn't let them impress you with their shouting. Yes, them shouting at you, that's a new one on me as well. Another guy says, avoid rush hour if you really want to brave the metro. Well, how are you going to do that? You're plain land. You're going to wait for 6 hours until rush hour is over? That's ridiculous. Okay. Somebody says the plastic bag is new to me. Yes, it's new to me as well. And then somebody else says they will run away with your luggage if you don't hold on to it tight. I've seen it happen with my own eyes. Yes, so have I. It's happened to me, actually. Not in Paris, but in Villanova-et-la-Geltrou, where I go frequently. But I was taking the train. Some guys saw that I had a laptop because, like a fool, this is like a little provincial town train stuff. So I was waiting for my train. I got my laptop out, did a little something that I needed to do, put the laptop back in the bag. And what do you know? When I get in the train, when it finally arrives, somebody grabbed my bag and ran out with my bag. And the train doors just closed and I couldn't do anything about it. So I yelled really loudly. Another woman, in English or in French, I can't remember, another woman saw what was happening and she yelled at the security service that was on the platform, and they ran after the guy and they actually recovered my bag. Okay, this was a miracle. So don't let this happen to you, because I don't think there's security people on the platforms, most places in Paris. Okay, another guy says, it's not overhyped at Gare du Nord. When I lived a couple of blocks up the hill from that metro, the crowds and pickpockets and beggars were such a hassle, I would usually walk down the hill to the city center. Congrats on foiling them. You could have yelled pickpocket and everyone on the train would have known who it was. But, yell is good. But somebody else says, I highly suggest a small money belt. Yes, perhaps. That would be better than nothing anyway. Somebody says, I put used handkerchiefs in one of my pockets. Always a pleasure to feel one of them putting their hands inside. Okay, somebody else, and this is another good suggestion. He says, tourist friends, please consider using the Roissy bus. an excellent suggestion, by the way. I always forget, but it's cheaper than the taxi and it works really well. So this person says it's safe, it's cheaper than a taxi, it's 15 euros when they wrote this, reliable, and will get you next to the Opera Aubert station, where you can call a taxi or use the metro to get to your hotel, all the while avoiding the crowds at Gare du Nord. And nothing in your pockets is a general rule in Paris, Metro, RER. If you want nothing stolen, use a bag with zippers and keep it in front of you while using the Metro, RER. Yeah, I use a crossbody bag and everything is zipped up in there, okay? And the most difficult time is when you first arrive because you have your passport, you have all your stuff with you. Afterwards, I just leave everything behind at the hotel or the apartment or wherever I'm staying. And also, again, it's worth saying that replacing a passport is a huge hassle. It costs a lot of money and a day or two of your time because you're going to have to stand in line at the American Embassy in Paris, and they are not friendly types. Having done this, I can tell you, not friendly. So once you get to your hotel or apartment, put the passport away, just travel with either a passport card, which you can order from the official US passport service, or your driver's license, because that's official ID and it's easy to replace. If somebody reaches in your pocket and gets your driver's license, it's not as big a deal, okay? Now, I should say also that if you don't have a lot of luggage with you, going through these big train stations is not as big of a deal, because when you first arrive is really the big problem. Afterwards, you just bring a little bit with you. You know, I pay for everything with my Apple Watch. If somebody takes my watch, okay, they don't know the password, they can't use it. When you're just touring around after you've settled into your hotel or whatever, it's not as big of a deal, really. And what about people that have to go to Gare du Nord because they are going to get on the Eurostar tour from England or some other destination on train? Well, if I have luggage, I use Uber or a taxi. The end. You know, I just budget this. It's not that much money and it saves a lot of hassle. One excellent comment. Somebody says, my sister was nearly pickpocketed on the Paris metro heading to Montmartre. It was a Saturday and the trains were crowded because they run less often. So the trains are always crowded. You can count on that. She had a crossbody bag in front of her, but was holding onto the pole and didn't have one of her hands on the bag. Another woman noticed the pickpockets and started shouting. It was two young teen girls who looked Eastern European, and they just drifted off at the next stop. My sister has been a New York City subway commuter for years, and she was mad at herself, but at least nothing was stolen. We were all a bit sloppy. The thing is, when you first arrive, I know you don't realize this, you're tired, you're jet-lagged, you're not on your best, okay? Unless you're some sort of special forces trained person. You know, if you're a normal human being, when you arrive in Paris, you're tired. So this is a very vulnerable time. And one last comment, somebody says, it's not overhyped. You literally just almost got robbed yourself. How can you say it's overhyped? And then this person says that Paris, and it's not all of Paris. It's some very specific spots in Paris. Montmartre is a problem. Gare du Nord is definitely a problem. Gare de l'Est is also a problem, but probably most of you don't go there. So just put on your thinking cap and then think, and then decide that you're going to get a taxi. If you have luggage, if you have all your stuff with you, it's either an Uber or a taxi or Roissy-Bus. Roissy-Bus is also very, very good. And I always forget to mention it, but especially if you're not staying too far from the Opera House, it's an excellent choice. My thanks to podcast editors Anne and Christian Codovan, who produced the transcripts. Next week on the podcast, an episode with Elise Riven about D'Artagnan and Alexandre Dumas. Great author, great book. I think you'll enjoy the episode. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you join me next time so we can look around France together. Au revoir. The Join Us in France Travel Podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Annie Sargent and copyright 2023 by Addicted to France. It is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.